Everyone. Welcome back to day two of our virtual Wild Horse and Burro Summit. Today, we are honored to be with Cécile Zahorka. She's also known as the Pixel Nomad. She's a renowned equine photographer and an author based in Germany. She gave a fabulous presentation last year, and I'm looking forward to this one as well. Just as a reminder, everybody's camera and mics are muted. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them after her presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to her now. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Cécile.
Thank you, everybody. I will start in a second. I'm just posting references into the chat in case anybody of you would like to check on the things I'm talking about, or maybe I will do it later because there's a limit of numbers. So I will do this later when we are having our discussion. So sorry for that little delay. I'm starting my presentation in a second with the whole thing. So I'm just asking to everybody who's joining, is there anybody from Europe or are you all from the US? You can write into the chat. No. Okay, so do you already see my screen? I suppose you should see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm hoping you see the correct screen with my screen, right? Not the notes.
It's showing
Free horses in Europe, or does it show the notes? Because I have two screens
it
and I
shows the
cannot.
notes. Yeah, it's showing the notes.
Oh, all right. So how can I change? Sorry, Zoom is sometimes I will, oops. I will basically just wait. I need to go back. I'm sorry for this, everybody.
It's okay.
I usually don't have too much trouble. I just need to change then my presentation mode. And I couldn't do this in the, okay. And now going back to Zoom. All right, so, okay, start. So you see my first screen now, I hope, and not
Yes.
the, okay, perfect. All right, so thanks for joining me and then also maybe watching later on YouTube. So this presentation is dedicated to the research about wild horses in Europe. And in the second part, also about my photography of free horses. So I want to begin with a very ordinary breed. It's the Haflinger horse. All right. And my way into horse photography started with this breed. So this is a picture of me taking pictures of Haflinger horses, although they came to cuddle. At the time, Haflingers were often dismissed as small, round, not serious horses, like fat ponies, kind of. So I didn't really agree with this idea, and I started to take pictures and photograph them in a way I thought they deserved to be seen. For example, to be strong, versatile, athletic in dressage, driving, endurance, Western jumping, and so on. But one moment with all this photography started change everything, and it did not happen in a competition, but it happened in summer above 2,000 meters. It happened on the Alm. The Alm is the high pasture of the Alps, and there are no stables, no fences, no arena, no supervisors or constant supervisors. It's just rock and water and weather and distance, and of course, the mountains and a herd of Haflinger horses. And what I loved most about this place is that this is not dramatic at all. It's kind of normal for Austria, for example. and also for Italy. And these horses were actually the same horses I knew from the sport, from the arena, but they were here. They were just having a good time and being free. And then this kind of moment, I love this moment, and I was asking myself, what is actually a wild horse? What makes a horse wild? Living in these conditions, or is it the ancestry, or is it the appearance of the horse, or the behavior, maybe the management, keeping the horses in the mountains? Does it make a horse wild when they live like this for a few months every year? So this is the first question of my project about free horses. So what do you mean when you say a wild horse? When you Google wild horse, you will find a mix of everything and anything. You will find the Mustang, you will find some iconic stallion fights, some historic photos, and some horses you would only see in a zoo, for example. So, what exactly are wild horses? And maybe we take a step back to the caves in Lascaux, for example, to one of these old prehistoric cave paintings somewhere in the middle of France. We see these bay small horses. They have these white snouts and white bellies, dark manes. They kind of look familiar. They remind us a lot of Exmoor ponies. So the question is, are Exmoor ponies somehow the last the last wild horses of Europe? But then you find different cave paintings. This, for example, is called Pêche-Merle Cave in France. And the horses there look completely different. They're spotted, they have a different color. So the question is this reality, or is it the artist doing something different? But then again, we have painted horses. So maybe they resembled painted horses, which they found in reality. So maybe in southern France, you will find the Potiok horse, which is an ancient breed in the mountains of the Basque country. And of, although they're not spotted, they are painted horses. So maybe the Potiok is one of the last wild horses of Europe. But then again, in Portugal, for example, you have some of these very ancient prehistoric rock carvings in northern Portugal in the Coa Valley. And they are like 20,000 years old. And in the same region lives the Garano horse for nobody knows how long. So the question is maybe the Garano horse of Portugal the last wild horse of Europe? And then again, there's this one famous last photograph of a wild horse. You will see this picture in the internet or in books a lot. And everybody calls this horse a tarpan horse. And since the photograph has a higher proof than ancient paintings in a wall, of course, which are 40,000 years old, the idea forms that the horse is kind of mouse colored, dun colored. So maybe this is the original wild horse of Europe. So in this case, the conic horse in the Netherlands, which we see a lot in these rewilding projects, this must be the original or the last wild horse in Europe. So is it this one, the last wild horse? And we all kind of know the Przewalski horse, which is the last wild horse of Asia. They are reddish or red dun, kind of. We assume that Europe's wild horse must have been gray. So we think, yeah, this actually makes sense. We have the red dun Przewalski horse, which we know that this is a wild horse. And so maybe the European wild horse must have been a mouse-colored horse, a gray horse, this dun-colored horse. But maybe we should slow down a bit, because in biology, wild is not a feeling, it's a category. And most horses on this planet, from Shetland pony to huge Shire horse, are wild horses. They all belong to the Equus caballus, the domestic horse. So in everyday language, we call many horses wild, but scientifically, the world collapses into very different realities because wild, we always thought that for a long time, the only horse that was treated as truly wild is the Przewalski horse, the so-called Tachi. Tachi or Tach horse is the name in the native region of, for example, Mongolia or Kazakhstan. So they are also called equus Przewalski because Przewalski was the guy who basically found these horses or gave them their name. So they went extinct in the wild, somehow survived through captive breeding, and were reintroduced to Mongolia in the 1990s, and also later to China, and now also currently to Kazakhstan. And this is one of the greatest conservation stories of our time, by the way. So the horse that got extinct into the wild is now roaming wild again. So this is the wild horse we know. And we ask ourselves the question if the Przewalski horse, which is not a different breed, it's a species. It's a different species than the horse. So we need to keep in mind that the horse and the white horse is basically like the wolf and the dog. So they almost look the same, but they're a different species, and we don't simply have words like wolf and dog. We call them both horse and horse. So that's a bit sloppy in our language. And the problem is we don't have proper words. So if the wolf is the ancestor of the dog, who is the ancestor of the horse? Which horse is the ancestor of our horses today? So one thing we always think that there was an ancestor, the European white horse, also maybe called Equus ferus, like the horse on the left photograph, the Cherson tarpan, which is supposed to be the last wild horse. Or we only have one more or less fossil of wild horses, which is more than one bone or one skull only. This horse shown on the right in Denmark, and you can see that the skeleton is very far from being complete. So for a long time, people imagine that we have a single original white horse, one ancestor, one type, one look. However, the reality is that now with DNA research, we can find something completely different. So roughly until 3,000 or 2,000 years ago, or no, not 3,000 years ago, it's 3,000 before our time, so meaning 5,000 years ago, multiple distinct horse lineages roamed in Europe and Asia. So Eurasia was home to multiple genetically distinct horse lineages, and they were divergent long before domestication. So we can keep in mind that there was not one wild horse, but multiple wild horses, like a mosaic, like like the wolf. We don't have one wolf which formed the dog we have today. We have so many different wolf lineages or species on the world, in the planet. In the US, you have so many different ones, also in Europe, in different regions. So if there isn't just one wolf, so why should there be only one horse? Horses somehow went through something like a genetic bottleneck because humans selected, of course, on horses which were easy to handle. And they carried the genetic marker DOM2, DOM2. So what you can find in modern domestic horses that they all share this one genetic marker. And when they studied the bones and skulls and teeth of extinct wild horses somewhere in Europe and Asia, they didn't find this genetic marker. So this is where research said, okay, we had this kind of selection progress, and somehow the stats also were kind of close somewhere in history. So we kind of have the same ancestors to all of our domestic horses nowadays. But it's very important to keep in mind that there used to be many different equus species, and we know very little about them as we don't really find so many bones of them, for example. Not only in Europe, they were also roaming in Northern America and in Northern Africa, and there was even a species in South America. Of course, they were not all parallel to each other. They appeared and disappeared throughout time in the Pleistocene and Holocene, meaning in the past 100,000 years. So it's a huge amount of time we're talking about. But some of them survived until the Holocene. This is the time we're in right now, since the last ice time, since the last prehistoric times. So the Holocene horses have survived until we don't exactly know, but we found proof in the Siberian and in the Alaskan permafrost that there are horses which are only 2,000 years old. So at least some of these wild horses have survived until quite recently. And we have all these diversity of different horse species, wild horse species, and only the Equus Przewalski, so the Przewalski horse or the Tach horse we know nowadays has survived to present days. So what happened to all of these other probably beautiful horses and that once roamed our planet? So when we stand in front of these cave paintings, we're not actually looking at one European wild horse. We're looking at horses, different wild horses in plural. So there was not one ancestor, there were many. And I think that's very important to keep in mind when talking about what was the original white horse. So one of the typical myths is, are white horses dun colored? So this is a very persistent idea we have. White horses were done, therefore done equals original or quite old DNA, or a horse that is dun colored must be primitive somehow. So bones and rock carvings, however, don't really tell the color of the horses. Only ancient DNA can tell. So our idea of a white horse comes, as I said, mostly down to this one photograph taken in the 19th century of this called tarpan. But somehow the studies comparing genetic DNA in wild horses came down that cave art and prehistoric showed prehistoric quite in a realistic way in the end. So we have bay, black, and dun, but we also have chestnut colors, and we even have spotted horses, which were found in the ancient DNA. So I think that's very interesting to keep in mind, because these painters of these cave arts were not fantasizing. So some of them were actually showing the true colors, and they were quite accurate. So even the dun color itself alone is not a marker of wilderness. There is not one white color. All of these are quite white colors. So dun colors, and that's also quite interesting, come in three different base colors. They are the grollo is the back when the horse is black, and then they have this dun color, and then they appear kind of gray. The bay dun, then they appear kind of yellowish, and we also have chestnut duns, and we don't see them too often actually, because many of these rewilding ideas, or many who backbreed horses somehow, or have an idea of original wild horses, they prefer these mouse or gray colored horses, these mouse dun horses or grollos, and never really like to see the chestnut duns. They're kind of selected out, which is weird. So we often, they don't really appear often. They're excluded because it doesn't look wild enough, although it's quite the same old color than the others. So in the end, the most common colors are actually bay and black, and chestnut somehow evolved a bit later from black. And these colors can still be found in many populations all over the world. I mean, these are the typical colors in a horse. And here you can see even in the Galician horse, for example, there are still the three colors. They're bay, black, and chestnut, for example. Although the chestnut are also less loved, to be honest. Um, so that brings us to Europe's most powerful equine ghost, the tarpan again. So in the popular imagination, the tarpan is Europe's last wild horse. So it's a fixed look, a fixed species, a fixed hoof, kind of. So this photograph of the last tarpan shows clearly a horse on a halter in a bit and a cut off tail and quite a long mane. So it's not at all like these heavier, sturdy, big-headed wild horses. So the question is this really a wild horse on the picture? So since it's the only photo, it's published in so many books, in the first horse books, and somehow horse books tend to do copy and paste, and they never change the narrative. They keep the narrative and the same story, and just change out a few things, but somehow this is still the prototype of a wild horse. And but when you come into historical descriptions or skeletal material and genetic evidence, nowadays you can critically review all of this. And it's not really convincing proof that this tarpan, or at least this picture, represents a surviving wild lineage. And the most plausible interpretation is that the so-called tarpans were already feral domestic horses at some point and later kind of romanticized into a biological reference point. And the evidences and pictures of tarpan or wild horses in Europe are quite little. So these pictures you see here are more or less the only pictures that show a so-called wild horse or tarpan horse. And you can see that the colored pictures, actually the left, the lower left one, the mosaic one, is from Roman times. So it's kind of 2000 years old. You can see some zebra markings, but the horse is dun colored, for example. And at the same time, the picture on the right is also a dun colored horse. So bay dun at least, and not gray dun or mouse colored dun. So there are not many pictures of the tarpan horse, and we don't really know how it looked like until today. So but once a story kind of hardens into a myth, it becomes a template. And there have been so many backbreeding projects in the past, I don't know, 200 years or 150 years or something like that. They try to bring back or reconstruct the wild horse in Europe. And they use this kind of photo or this idea of a tarpan horse and for wild aesthetics. Sometimes horse populations are still being bred on these close characteristics. So it's kind of a human selection that happens today when it comes to wild horses, or how a horse should look like when you talk of a wild horse. So it's a kind of a paradox, actually. Also, there has been a myth that these horses share the same wild genetics as the tarpan, which is also not correct. All horses are more or less the same. They all are equus caballos. And the conic horse, which is used a lot of reference for wild horses, is actually a very lovely breed from Poland. They're called Konik Polski, and which literally means small horse from Poland. And they are bred in Poland as proper horses, like for riding and for driving, for example. And kids go quite well with these horses. And of course, also for extensive grazing. So they are less kept in stables, more outside in the fields. And this is why they're quite robust. Then in the 1980s, they were used for the first rewilding project, and then somehow they became a symbol for wild horse in Europe. So the question is, how did the wild horse become our modern horse? Horse domestication was not one single event, but because we already know that some different cultures in the steppe between Asia and Europe had horse holding, but these horses did not give rise to modern domestic horses. They gave rise to different lineages. And you have to keep in mind that the domestication happened somehow parallel in different places, but only one very successful lineage became the modern domestic horses we have today, because they were somehow selected in easy to handle. So they of course naturally selected the horses which were kinder or easier to tame. And these horses then became the ancestors of our modern horses. And actually, all the breeds we have nowadays on our world were selected on being nicer to humans. And all the other horses, breeds, or lineages, I don't think you can already talk about breeds at that point, but they were basically replaced by this DOM2 lineage because they kind of expanded quite rapidly, and they replaced the others because obviously when you have horses nowadays, you want to have a horse which is nice and not a horse which is not nice. So you kind of replace them. So what we call horses today is the result of selection and also of replacement. And that means that all the other horses disappeared. So the question is, why did the wild horses die out? We already saw that other domestic horses were replaced because through the nicer, easier to handle horses. But what happened to the wild horses? Of course, wild horses have always been prey, and they also have been competitors. They have been preyed for their meat, like other animals, like deer, like cattle, like you name all the animals humans hunted. Oops, and also hunted to extinction. So, but there were also competitors, and that's a bit an uncomfortable idea that horse people killed horses, wild horses, because the wild stallions attempted um, to steal the mares of domestic herds, or um, wild mares kind of blended into the domestic herds and find a new home there. So when you observe wild horses or free roaming horses, the youngsters somehow get kicked out of their group, of their family band at some point. So they try to find a new family. So they try to get into the domestic horses, for example, at that point in Europe. And of course, the horse farmers didn't want these stallions to steal their mares, but they welcomed when wild mares came to their herd, so their herd was bigger. So basically, they became hybrids at some point, and we tend to see that hybridization is a failure, but in nature, hybridization happens all the time. And it's happening actually even today with the Przewalski horse, because the programs do struggle with hybridization with domestic horses, because in places, for example, in China or in Mongolia, the farmers still have domestic horses in these wide open areas without fences. So it can happen when they are too close to the breeding grounds of the Przewalski horses, that they kind of mix up. And this is a struggle the conservation efforts face today. So if it happens again today with these newly reintroduced horses, you can bet everything, your house on it. This happened in the past a lot. And you also have historic events of or written evidence of this happening. So maybe we should also imagine prehistoric Europe, that domestic horses were spreading. Wild horses were being forced into the same spaces, and the extinction was not one event, but somehow you had this exchange between the domestic horse, even the one dominant line of the DOM2 horses, the easy to handle horses, somehow exchanged with local wild stock again and again. We're talking about a period of time of 2000 years, probably. It's not 1 year, it happens for such a long time. And at some point, there were no wild horses anymore. They disappeared. They were gone. And they were lost, and so probably when in the 1700s or in the 18th century, 19th century, when they captured a so-called wild horse, it already looked like a domestic horse. And this is probably how this one famous picture happened of the tarpan. And this is why all these pictures don't really look like wild horses. It's because they were probably already hybrids at some point. And so nothing was left, and all the genetic kind of some of the genetic still lives in our modern horses, in our modern domestic horses today, which is actually quite a nice idea, to be honest, and a bit comforting also. So if the wild horses in Europe didn't disappear in one clear moment, if it faded through pressure and conflict and blending, so maybe the question isn't where or what is the wild horse, maybe the question is where does this kind of freedom still exist today? And this is something where my personal work starts and begins. I stopped thinking about wild horses and what is wild and what is not wild. I just keep calling them free horses. And I would like to start now my second part of the presentation about through my lens with all the free horses I have in Europe and all this big diversity and the beauty these horses contain. So I'm a photographer, and I don't only photograph horses because I think they're beautiful. I also photograph them because I think horses are somehow history in motion, and because their bodies carry landscapes, and because their survival tells us so much about us self, about our society and culture, and what we have forgotten actually also about how we kept horses and how free horses used to roam our landscape. If they were wild or not, if they were hybrids or pure, it doesn't even matter. It's just something that we have forgotten, and that we are struggling to get back nowadays. So I started with a project that is called Forgotten Horses. And it's a project I'm working on since 6 or no, even longer, 7, 8 years now, even. So it's called Forgotten Horses. And as you can imagine, it's about horses which are forgotten in our modern society. And I have discovered that only a fraction of the world's horse breeds are considered as safe. There are statistics of the FAO about it. And there are so many rare and under-documented or not recorded at all horse breeds in the world, in Europe, also in the US, in all countries where you can find horses, you will find horses there endangered. And it's not because they're inferior, it's because they kind of lost visibility, because they have lost purpose or any kind of narrative relevance, because you don't need horses anymore like you used them 50 or 100 years ago. And something really surprised me when I started this project, that many of these rare and endangered horse breeds actually live quite a free life. They're not wild in the sense of a wild horse, but they're kind of free because they don't have stables, or they don't have this constant control. They're inside a system that allows them some space, maybe living in freedom. Some of them are breeding in freedom. Some of them are super free because people want them to be completely free again and rewild them. And so this project Free Horses was born, because I thought, okay, Forgotten Horses is a good project, but they deserve a second platform or emphasizes about it. And I also think that the existing categories don't really work in this sense. For example, the biology categories of a wild horse, and also in the narrative with the wild and free horse, it's a bit confusing somehow. So I would like to show you a little movie I did last year for the last summit, and describing my personal way how to define the free horses. And I hope that the sound will start. So please give me a short feedback if the sound starts, not in the chat, but please vocally.
Are there any wild horses left in
You
Europe?
can hear it.
Perfect. It's a question that sparks our imagination. Images of untamed herds running freely across vast landscapes come to our mind. But what is the reality? Where do horses in Europe come from? Their story begins with cave paintings and carvings, thousands of years old. These ancient imagery show the deep connections between humans and horses, a bond that shaped our history. In Europe, the idea of free horses is deeply rooted in tradition. From managed taboo in Eastern Europe to the semi-wild herds of France, free horses are a testament to centuries of cultural and ecological practices. They're not just a part of nature, they're a part of us. Truly wild horses, like the tarpan, have been extinct in Europe for centuries. But the romantic vision of wild horses never faded. Through selective breeding, humans have recreated breeds that echo the wild horses of the past, like the hack horse or the Dülmen horse, for example. Yet the reality is much more complex. Today, the concept of free horses in Europe includes a wide variety of traditions, breeds, and practices, blending wilderness with human stewardship in surprising ways. Let's explore the diverse ways free horses live in Europe today, between tradition and wilderness. In Portugal, the Alta Lusitano exemplifies centuries-old traditions of free-ranging horses, cared for in expensive pastures. The Haflinger represents seasonal grazing systems, such as the transhumance, where horses roam the Alps freely during the summer before returning to human care in winter. Selective breeding in natural conditions has shaped breeds like the Camargue horse in France or the hardy Husul horse in the Carpathians. These horses thrive in semi-natural environments, blending human care with nature's touch. In regions like northern Spain or Portugal, semi-wild horses such as the Guarano or the Asturian live in minimal human interference, maintaining their natural instincts. In rewilding projects, breeds like the Conic horse in Eastern Europe or Saraya horse in Portugal are managed to mimic the roles of extinct wild horses, helping restore ecosystems. Truly feral horses, like those in Livno, Bosnia, or in the Sierra Nevada in Spain, live without human management, wild in behavior, though descendant from domestic ancestors. Truth about free horses in Europe is complex, a delicate balance between tradition and wilderness, shaped by history, culture, and conservation. And that's why I don't call them wild horses. Instead, I call them free horses because they represent freedom in many forms: freedom of movement, freedom from strict human control, and freedom to continue the traditions that connect us to nature. Let's explore the free horses of Europe between tradition and wilderness.
All right. So that was I need to. So that was a little film I did for the last summit, and I thought I will show it again. You can also find it on YouTube, by the way, if you want to watch it again. So when you want to find free horses in Europe, you can go to many places. You already have seen in this little trailer that many many places in Europe have different breeds and kinds and of traditions, and that they have also different keeping of the horses, for example, that you want them to be free. And some of them are feral horses. So that also means that there's a high diversity of breeds and traditions. And one of them, one of the places I really liked a lot for its wilderness and the semi-wild horses are the mountains of Spain. For example, here in Asturias, the Astucon horse. It's a small mountain horse, and it's believed that they are quite ancient because they carry some of this wild horse genetic I was talking about through the hybridization through their mitochondrial DNA. So through the maternal line, they found that they carry some of this wild horse DNA. So it's quite possible that the early domestic horses in Iberia mixed with local wild horses, and this is the outcome some generations later. It's something of the closest you can get to the original, one of the most original European horse breeds, actually. So they live in the mountains of Asturias, as I said, all year. And you will find many different breeds in Spain, for example, and also in Portugal. And this is one of them. And they're quite beautiful, delicate, and smaller horses. I can tell you, I don't know in hands right now. I don't know the hand system, but they're like 1 meter 30 and 1 meter 20. So you would call them kids' horses, actually, but they were used by all the farmers and people were riding them, and people are still riding them. The farmer who owns these horses says he would ride them, but they're somewhere on his mountain, so he's not really using them anymore. They live in quite large herds on the mountain all year round, and the only thing, the human interference, is that they take out the youngsters at some point, or they take out at least the young stallions. And actually, the many foals don't really even survive the first year because they fall victim to wolves. So the wolves prey on these horses, and the wolves have been to this place since ever. So they were not even newly introduced. This is something they always coexisted, probably since horses and wolves came to these places. And these horses are also quite skilled in foraging for food, and they feed on these very hard gorse and hedges. They're quite spiky, and they will rip your shirt when you walk through them, for example. And the horse, as you can see, they actually feed on it. And they find food inside this. So other horses would probably not even look at it, and they know how to deal with this kind of food. And when you look closer, you will see that their skin somehow already looks like leather because they're so used to all these spikes. Yeah. Another breed which is very not far away are the Lucino horses, also in Spain. They're a small breed of only black horses in northern Spain, and they were also used as universal horses for the farmers. And if the farmers needed a horse, they caught them from their lands, and then they used them for riding, for driving, pulling wagons, pack horses, and so on. So everything. And these horses build their own family bands, and the only interference is when the humans sometimes feed them hay in winter, or they remove some horses from the area, for example, young stallions. And the question why, of course, rises. It's just because compared to back in the days, even if this place looks huge, at some point there is a fence, and horses cannot migrate if they are looking for food or if there are too many horses in one area. So natural regulation would mean that the horses would starve or die in order to regulate themselves. And luckily, these owners or these people who own these lands don't want this anymore. So the Lucino horse is also quite a handsome horse. They're a little bit bigger and sturdier than the Astrakhan horse we saw before. They're good in size and they could be used for riding for adults and kids, of course. But unfortunately, nobody really knows them because there are so few of them, maybe 500 a total of this breed. And they have quite nice body. And you can also imagine these horses were typical Spanish backcountry horses. And everybody thinks of Spanish horses. They have these very fancy Andalusian horses in mind, but these are actually the very typical horses for Spain, because the fancier Spanish Andalusian horses were rather the horses of the high society, of the nobility, and these were the commoner horses, the horses of everybody, what every farmer would have, or a regular person. So it's quite likely that this kind of type of horse actually also got shipped to the Americas with the Spanish conquerors, because these were very hardy horses. They didn't need a lot of food. They probably survived the whole voyage, the whole journey on the ship better. And yeah, so when in the summer, the summers are quite hot, so they they also burn the grass to dust. So these horses also have learned, to adapt and eat from the bushes. And it's also quite an important role in keeping this dry grass down, as you can see, because this is fuel for wildfires. And these wildfires occur a lot in Spain and Portugal, for example. And when these horses are cutting down the grass, there are more corridors without fuel for the fires. So you can see more horses grazing on this dry gorse, which would probably burn quite well. And these are Garano horses in Portugal, which are quite similar in type again to all of them. And they graze on these shrubs, and they take off the dry stuff of the bushes and kind of maintain the landscape by this. And you can see that his mouth is also very furry and very hard, because you can see literally the spikes. And he's trying to pull the spikes or the shrubs with the teeth, so he doesn't need to touch them too much. So it's quite interesting to watch them eat, because it's a different eating behavior than on grass, for example. When they're actually they're pulling and cutting down the bushes and tearing the plants apart. And eating these spiky plants actually gives them sometimes these funny mustache. This is a horse in Galicia, Caballo Galego, which is very similar to the Garano I just showed you. So these horses are quite related to each other. And the mane is actually cut in summer because they're rounding up the horses once a year, and then they're cutting off the mane. So they mark the horses because they also register them or give them treatment against parasites, for example. And this is how they keep track on the horses, which are used already. But not all free horses in Europe are of the small and ancient type. We just saw the horses in Spain and Portugal. Many of the light riding horses, for example, can also be found in freedom. For example, here, these are horses in Hungary, the Kisper Felver. That's the Hungarian half-blood, we would say in English. And the mares and youngsters are actually kept in freedom all year, and only the stallions are used for riding. So the horses are walking around the farm, the stud farm, and there are no fences. They can return back because the only water source is on the stud farm, and then they can return to freedom on the steppe and grassland all around. And if they don't come back at home home in the evening, for example, or whenever they are turned back to the farm, they are ridden, they're horseback shepherds bringing them back. So these horses navigate quite independently. This kind of um, breeding is coming back also in Germany, or this happens in Germany in a place in the middle of Germany called Thuringeti. And they're using German sports horses, yeah, which are actually performance horses. And they're living quite a good life. This is a picture I took of the youngsters of the stallions growing up together. On the left, there is an old stallion which was used for stud in the past years. And he's living with the young stallions of the 1 and 2 year old, or maybe 3 year olds, and they're all living together. And this just proves that even the finer sports horses can be robust enough to live a free life. And this is the mare group, the young mares, which were not used for breeding yet. And these are the brood mares. And I talked to the owner, and they said actually all of these horses adapt quite well. Of course, those who were born in freedom have an easier life in freedom later. And but usually almost all mares, or also the stallions which are released here, manage quite well. And of course, they're looked more after than in other places, obviously. But these horses are sold in auctions and used in performance shows all over the place. And it just shows you don't need to have a super rustic horse. Somehow, the horses readapt to wilderness at some point. And not only hardy ponies live in these semi-wild conditions, also in Spain again, but also in Italy, in Eastern Europe, and in many places, you use heavy draft horses in the mountains, and they roam the mountains in a band of 1 stallions with a group, a harem, or a family of mares, and there are multiple bands in one region, and there are no fences, anything in between. So many draft breeds were created in the 19th century in Europe, but at the base of these breeds often, so the biggest breeds are the Belgian draft horses. Maybe you have seen them before. So they were used with local mountain horses with a whole population, and then somehow these local draft horses evolved, and they keep the rustic characteristics. And it's quite funny because you would even not notice them driving on these mountain roads because they're high up in the mountains. As you can see here, these horses are grazing on an area where you are skiing in winter. So you can find them hanging around quite close to the road sometimes. And yeah, so in winter they are brought to the lower areas of the mountains, but they are quite outside all year. And here, not all of the horses live in wild conditions. You also have some feral populations. So these are horses which are often forgotten by humans and left alone. It's the same story as everywhere. It, like in the US or in the Australian Brumbies, that um, the origin is not quite clear. The horses somehow have been forgotten, and Spain is a very mountainous region or country, and there used to be mountain horses for type or mountain horse types for everywhere in the mountain range. So we have already seen a few, and these are just another type, and they were used as pack horses for driving, transport, any kind of works. And when they were not needed, they were released, as we have seen before. So somehow in this area, somehow they have forgotten the horse, that they have for some reason the local people forgot them in the mountains because it was too much of a hassle to bring them back into the stables. I mean, horses cost money at some point, so they just left them there, and nobody really cared because nobody really claimed their space, just like everywhere in the world. And so this also happened in Europe, and just on a smaller scale sometimes, or in a more narrow scale. They live on quite high altitudes and in areas where really there is survival of the fittest, because even in Spain you get cold winters when you're on 2,000 meters altitude. So the biggest toll, however, accidents with cars on these mountain roads. That they actually kill a lot of horses. This also happens to the semi-wild horses we just saw in Spain when they're quite close to the road, or in the national parks in UK, for example. This can also happen. There are quite a few of these populations in Spain and also in other places, but sometimes it's also better not to publish too much about them, because this way they stay unnoticed until there is a group that forms around them to kind of protect them. So sometimes it's easier to protect them when they didn't cause trouble yet, kind of. However, there is quite a famous population or famous herd in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Livno. And these horses were released after the Second World War because nobody needed these horses anymore in agriculture. You can see they're quite big and sturdy, which indicates their origin were quite heavy working horses. You can still find in the whole Balkan region, there were horses released in the Yugoslavian war in the 1990s, so not that long ago, basically 30 years ago. You will find some pure Bosnian mountain horses which have survived in remote areas, and sometimes you will find the horses mixed up somehow. So that's quite interesting that you have a very different type of horses in different regions, which are kind of isolated from each other. So now in Livno, there are about 1,000 horses, and that means it's a place where you can observe horses and horse behavior quite well and take pictures or videos like this one, because the landscape is also very open compared to many of these mountain areas of the other horse breeds, because you always have trees or shrubs in your lens in the view. So this place is becoming more and more popular with photographers and people to go there to experience wild horses. And there's a whole tourism starting around the horses, and tourism can be helpful, but tourism can also be harmful. It's always a balance, but at least this gives the horses protection, because the locals have understood that the horses have a value to their town, and people are coming to their town, spending money there. There are small businesses arising around these horses. So back in the days, horses were poached for dog food, actually, and now nobody is poaching them anymore, or at least not that much anymore. And the only reason they would die would be car accidents again, which local people are trying to avoid more and more. And also the wolf is also regulating a bit the population, but the population is growing. So we will see where the horses of Livno will end up someday when they keep on growing. So the question is, where are the free horses in Europe? And my answer is pretty much everywhere. And there are more than you think, because I try to map my data, and it's close, and it's not even close to be complete. You will find many horses in the mountains, like in my pictures, because remote areas are often the last untouched lands by humans, and horses find space where humans give them space. And because you cannot do any agriculture in the mountains like you do in the flatlands. So that's their last refuge in Europe. But you will also find them in some areas which are quite traditional to horses, and people made them into their culture. So when people ask me what I want to protect through my photography, it's always hard to say I protect horses by taking pictures or videos, because protection doesn't really start with fences or laws. It starts much earlier. It starts with seeing horses, because horses need to be seen to have a value. So my work is more about value and making forgotten horses or free horses visible, and make visible how much diversity actually exists outside the published records. And so, yeah. And at the same time, I also realized that visibility doesn't only happen through publishing in books, in magazines, or social media. It also happens through experience, because I, for example, can only publish this amount of posts or books or anything, and publishing a book is quite a big deal. So I also started to ask other photographers to join me, or can join me in these experiences. So I don't do only workshops. I also offer explorer tours, where you have the opportunity to observe, to understand horses and systems and the context, and to see and photograph for yourself, and to find horses which are a bit beyond the mainstream. So yeah, meaning you can join me on my travels if you are interested, and to experience places like this one, or rare breeds and herds. And this is where I come to the end of my presentation. I will keep going and keep exploring. And if you're interested in seeing more, I have published calendars, for example. I mean, January already started, but I can still ship them anywhere. And I have, as I said, published the book Forgotten Horses. So feel free to follow me on YouTube and maybe join me on one of my experiences. And if you ever have questions about horses in Europe, just let me know, and let's stay in touch. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Um, I know that Craig had some comments for you. I don't know if you wanted to look
Yeah,
at the chat.
I have to look at the chat now because I couldn't see it before. Um, all right. Yeah. Oh, Craig. Um, you disagree? I mean, maybe if we can also discuss, if you like, if you unmute yourself, then we can just discuss it instead of simply reading, if you want, Craig.
Here, hold on a second.
Okay.
We can hear
Start.
you, Craig.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Hi.
yeah. I think my point I wanted to make is that the horse, as just about any species, is really much more from the natural world when you consider all their millions of years. And the horse is a very ancient species, along with its whole family. So many of the things that people bring out as phenotypes when they capture them and repress their natural lifestyle can quickly revert, and that has to do with the differentiation between a phenotype, which is an expressed genetic trait, and a genotype, which is inherent in the organism, if you just want to look at it in a biological way. So that's why so many domestic species of plants and animals are reinvigorated from their relatives that still remain in the wild. And that's true of corn and wheat and chickens and cows and all kinds of animals. So that's the main point I wanted to make, is that when we say the horse isn't wild, I don't think that's entirely true. I think that even the domestic horse is more natural than man-made.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think our language, and not only the English language but also the German language, we just say wild and horse, and we don't have a differentiation for more detailed descriptions of horses. So I think there's a lot of confusion and debates around horses about what is a wild horse, and you will find so many wrong texts about horses just because they look like what we think is wild. For example, these dun-colored horses are often contributed to look older, or they must be wilder or older or anything than other colored horses, which is not, it's just a color. I mean, we can also find draft horses in dun color, or quarter horses, which are quite bred for performance, which have these dun colors, for example. So it's just the color which is looking like these old colors, but at the same time, I think it's very important to keep in mind that horses, yeah, it's such a big topic. Actually, you could write so many books with it. I have pasted some of the references I used in this presentation. If you want to check on these PDFs, and there are a lot of scientific papers popping up every year about horse history, which is
Yeah.
actually rewritten at this very moment because people are finding out so much interesting stuff. Because you will find more and more horses frozen in the permafrost of Siberia, for example, or also in Alaska. So we will see what this will show us in the future, where the origin of our horses might be and how they are related to each other. And when they do, for example, these DNA tests of whatever they're testing of the bones, or what they're finding of these wild horses. So they're testing them to compare them to modern horses. So the question is, what modern horses are they tested to? For example, when you have a look at these DNA tests, you will find the same 50-ish breeds being in these samples. For example, the Arabian horse, the sports horse, quarter horse, you will find a Shire horse, you will find probably the Exmoor pony, you will find a few like typical breeds, but you will probably not find the Bosnian mountain horse I have shown you, or the Asturias horse, because they don't really show up in these studies, because nobody has put or taken so many samples that they are in these DNA databases. So it will be interesting how actually all these lesser known breeds, which are maybe more closer to an original horse, are related to the archaeologic DNA they find. So
Yeah.
this will be something they will find out in future, hopefully.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. Really looking forward to checking into those references.
Yeah, yeah. So my point is that most books, and this is something that really annoys me with new books being published about horses, again and again, like the typical generic horse book you can find with some breeds and general history. They actually still do the same copy and paste, and they transfer the same old knowledge or the same research which is outdated. I don't want to say it's an error because at that point, at that time, 100 years ago, they did know better. So now we know better, but they don't really update these kind of texts. So I think that's also something which is quite interesting to witness right now, and hoping that publishers will react to neuroscience, but somebody needs to write it probably, so so they can copy it again. Yeah.
Right. Great presentation. Really learned a lot,
Thank
and
you
those
so much.
pictures are marvelous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to take your reference list and I'm going to add that on the website by your presentation so that anyone can go in and download this and have the information in case you can't grab it really quick from.
Sure. Yes, and if anybody wants to dive deeper into one specific thing, just let me know. I still have a lot of PDFs that didn't find into these references and presentation today because otherwise it's just blowing up everything. But I think it's quite interesting to have a look at least these references, and sometimes they're hard to read because it's scientific language, but you can also see the conclusion or run it through something like ChatGPT to get a summary into easier language to understand or something like that. So they're quite entertaining in the end.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody's just saying how much they enjoyed your presentation. Wonderful, wonderful knowledge you shared, beautiful pictures. So thank you again for being a part of this. Does anybody else have any questions? No, I think that's it. Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for being a part of this again, and thanks for everything that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this again and inviting me. It's so lovely. And
Thank
I'm
you.
very, very curious about the upcoming month. So I will be present most of the times when I can manage. So I'm looking forward to the other presentations.
Well, thank you. And everybody, their next presentation will be Craig Downer at 1 o'clock. So we'll see you later, Craig. And thank
Yeah.
you again, Cecile. And we'll see everybody later. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.